Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. We're going to jump right into one of the most fascinating and honestly kind of baffling paradoxes in modern sports history, the mystery of Brazil's football decline. Now, when you think of football, or soccer, depending on where you're from, you instantly think of Brazil, right? The vibrant colors, the samba rhythm, that pure, unadulterated magic on the pitch. But right beneath that legendary reputation, there's a very real, very modern mystery going on with this global powerhouse. To really understand the fall, though, we first have to respect the absolute height of the mountain they climbed. 5. That's the magic number. Brazil has won the World Cup a staggering 5 times. They are the undisputed kings of the sport. And get this, they're the only nation on Earth to have played in every single edition of the tournament since it literally began. I mean, football isn't just a sport there, it's practically a religion. But that brings us to the central mystery we're unpacking today. It's been over 20 years since Brazil last lifted that golden trophy. 20 years! In their last 5 World Cup appearances, they've crashed out in the quarterfinals 4 separate times. So you really have to ask, how? How does the greatest footballing nation on the planet, a place that literally breeds the game in every narrow street and neighborhood, lose its grip on the beautiful game? Let's get into it. Section 1. Birth of Joga Bonito. From tragedy to the yellow jersey. To figure out what went wrong, we actually have to rewind all the way back to 1950. Brazil suffered a catastrophic World Cup loss at home to Uruguay. It was a massive national heartbreak, known as the Maracanazo. The whole country was so traumatized that fans genuinely blamed their white and blue uniforms. They basically said these lack national spirit. So they completely scrapped them and held a nationwide contest for a new design. And a 19-year-old kid, just a fan, submitted the winning concept, a yellow shirt with green trim, blue shorts, and white socks. Literally born out of sheer tragedy, the most iconic uniform in sports history was created. Following that trauma, we see this absolutely incredible rise. You see, the 1950 loss kind of pushed football out of the stadiums and into the streets, into the favelas. Kids who couldn't even afford shoes were playing with literally anything they could kick. And this street-level obsession built a whole new generation of fearless, wildly creative players. By 1958, a 17-year-old kid named Pelé makes his debut, and boom, Brazil wins their first World Cup. 4 years later, in 1962, they go back-to-back. They were playing a brand of football completely infused with raw, unbridled flair. Which brings us to Section 2, the 1970 masterpiece, the greatest team ever assembled. By 1970, manager Mario Zagallo managed to pull off something pretty incredible. He took that chaotic creativity of the streets and paired it with hardcore tactical preparation. They even trained at altitude for 21 days just to get used to the thin Mexican air. The result? A concentration of talent that became known as the Five Aces. You had Pelé, the king, Jairzinho, the hurricane, who, by the way, scored in every single game of that tournament. Rivellino, with a shot so hard they called it atomic. Tostão, the brilliant tactical forward, and Gerson, the brains running the midfield. It was an attacking front line bursting with so much talent, opponents literally couldn't comprehend how to defend them. And Pelé, of course, was the absolute crown jewel of it all. One of his teammates perfectly summed up what it was like playing with him. He said, when you stop to think about what he was about to do, he'd already done it. Pelé's speed of thought was just completely off the charts. He was always seconds ahead of everyone else on the pitch, pulling off passes and moves that honestly defied logic. This genius culminated in what is arguably the greatest team goal in the history of the sport, right during the 1970 final against Italy. Here's how it goes down. Step 1, Tostão drops back to manipulate the Italian defense. The ball moves super fluidly up the pitch. Then, step 2, Pelé gets it, and without even glancing over, rolls this perfectly weighted blind pass to his right. He just knew exactly where his captain was going to be. Step 3, Carlos Alberto comes sprinting into the frame in full flight and absolutely smashes it into the net. It was a perfectly orchestrated masterpiece, pure Joga Bonito. Moving on to Section 3, Era of Wild Geniuses, when the streets ruled the pitch. Now let's fast forward a bit to the 1990s. Brazil was churning out players with almost too much individual flair to be controlled by any rigid system. Take Romario, for example. The guy famously refused to train properly, flat out claiming he wasn't an athlete but a goal scorer. He'd say, "The night is my friend," partying all the time and literally showing up to morning training still in his club clothes. But you know what? The results were completely undeniable. He was named player of the tournament and led Brazil to win the 1994 World Cup. He was just a hypnotic killer on the pitch, proving that pure, raw genius could entirely override traditional discipline. There's actually this amazing story that captures his vibe perfectly. While playing for Barcelona under the legendary coach Johan Cruyff, Romario wanted a few extra days off so he could go to the Rio Carnival. Cruyff tells him, "Look, if you score 2 goals in our next game, I'll give you the time off." Well, in the very next match, Romario scores 2 goals in the first 20 minutes. He immediately looks over at the bench, signals to be subbed out, and tells Cruyff, "Coach, my flight is in 1 hour." And Cruyff just had to let him go. Absolutely wild. This whole era of wildly uncontainable talent pretty much peaked with the 2002 squad. I mean, just look at this roster. Ronaldo, the phenomenon. Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Cafu, Roberto Carlos. These guys were out there playing with huge smiles on their faces, trying tricks and flicks that European teams couldn't even begin to anticipate. They brought that raw, street-style individual brilliance right to the World Cup stage, and they won the whole thing in 2002. It was beautiful to watch. But as we'll see, it was kind of the end of an era. Which sadly leads us to Section 4, the 7-1 trauma, the death of the flair. In 2014, Brazil hosted the World Cup again. This was supposed to be it, right? The ultimate redemption for that 1950 Maracanazo heartbreak. Instead, it turned into this, 7-1. Just let that shocking scoreline sink in for a second. Playing in the semifinals against a fiercely organized, clinical German team, Brazil suffered the absolute darkest, most humiliating day in their entire footballing history. They were down 5-0 by halftime, at home, in front of thousands of their own weeping fans, without their star forward Neymar, who was out injured, and their captain Thiago Silva, who was suspended. The team just completely collapsed. The legendary aura of Brazilian invincibility didn't just crack that day. It completely shattered into a million pieces. So we have to ask in Section 5, where is the magic? The European assimilation. Why haven't they recovered since then? Well, a huge part of the answer comes down to economics and a massive cultural shift. Look at this data. In that legendary 1970 team, all 22 players played their club football domestically, right there in Brazil. By 1994, that number dropped to about half, but jumped to the 2022 World Cup. Out of a 26-man squad, only 3 played in Brazil. 3! It's been a total brain drain of Brazilian talent leaving for the massive, super wealthy clubs over in Europe. And this geographical shift fundamentally changed how the national team plays. Traditional Joga Bonito relied on raw flair, total individuality, and those fearless street skills we talked about. But today, when young Brazilian prodigies move to Europe at like 18 or 19 years old, they are immediately plugged into highly disciplined tactical systems. They're taught to prioritize positional discipline over their own individual magic. They're essentially forced to nerf their own creativity just to fit into the modern European machine. Because of this shift, a lot of football legends and pundits actually argue that Neymar Jr. might be the very last true bearer of that authentic Joga Bonito spirit. For the last 15 years or so, he's been one of the very few players carrying that traditional, joyous, trick-heavy Brazilian spark on the international stage. But the reality is, one man alone just can't sustain the identity of an entire footballing nation. Which leaves us with this final kind of provocative thought. As long as kids are kicking a ball in the favelas, the raw, natural talent of Brazil will never really die. But when that talent is instantly exported and then molded by European tactics, you really have to wonder, can the streets of Brazil ever reclaim the beautiful game on the world stage? Or has modern structured football permanently erased the chaotic magic of the yellow jersey? It's definitely something to think about the next time you watch them take the pitch. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, guys. I hope it opened your eyes to the fascinating evolution of Brazilian football. Catch you next time.